Hello and welcome back, everybody, to the channel. We are starting off on a new book, a new series of analysis videos today. It's a new book. It's a new time. It is Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. Yes, of course, of course. Now, I'm sure some of you have read this. If you have not, you're probably asking, what is this? It is a wonderful book. It is written in the 1950s by Chinua Achebe, who is from Nigeria. This is a book that I've taught quite a few times. In fact, I think it might have been in the curriculum of the first year that I taught high school English. And so it's one that is near and dear to my heart, that I really enjoy. I hope I do it justice for having taught it several times. We shall see. But yeah, this is it's a really good book, and I hope that you're going to come along with me to enjoy it and find out a lot more about it and see what's up about it. If you have read it, then I hope you've got maybe something you can contribute. If you want to put things in comments. If you haven't read it, well, maybe you'll be convinced to read it by the time we're done. Who knows? So, what do we need to know about this book? As I said, it was written in the 50s, and according to kind of the popular lore around this book, it was written by Achebe as a response to a lot of kind of European literature, American literature about Africa. And so a lot of times you would see Africa written in these books by people who knew it either as visitors or tangentially or didn't really know it at all. And that is where all the dark savages were, right? It's where the heroes and the adventurers would go to find hidden cities and to explore diamond mines and things like that. And along the way, they would have to deal with the restless natives, and they would have to deal with the people who actually lived there. And I think it was Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which was sort of the tipping point for Achebe, because when you read that book, Conrad depicts the natives in Africa as basically one level above kind of beasts and animals. They're all a bunch of shrieking, half-naked, spear-shaking monsters, in a sense. And so the story goes that was the book that made Achebe say, I have to do something about this. This is ridiculous. And so he wrote Things Fall Apart as a response to that. And this is a book that's kind of in the early waves of the sort of post-colonial literature, because in the middle of the 20th century, a lot of colonies in various parts of the world were gaining their independence and their own self-governance. Yay! And what the native peoples there realized was that, wait a minute, for all this time, all our colonizers, the people who came in and sort of upturned our way of life, they sent their writers to write about us. And so for most people, their only real exposure to Africa, for example, would be through the literature written by English authors or European authors or American authors, people who were distinctly not African. And so we've got people now who are saying, you know what, who should be telling our stories? We should be telling our stories. And so you have people in these former colonies who are saying, we need to tell the stories of our people as we know them, as natives of this land. And so Achebe was one of those. And what his goal was with Things Fall Apart was to tell the story of his people. He is from Nigeria. He is from the Igbo people in Nigeria, in Western Africa. And what he wanted to communicate out to the world was, what did it mean to be an Igbo person? What does that even mean to be a person who lived in that region before the colonists came? And so he wrote this lovely, beautiful book about exactly that, to try and tell us. It was written in English, so you can kind of tell he was not writing this for his own people. He was writing this for people outside. And in addition, another clue that he wasn't writing this for Igbo people, who probably know all of this anyway, is the title, Things Fall Apart. Now, I'm sure I don't need to tell you, because you are an educated reader, but just in case your mind is fogged up a bit, the title comes from a wonderful poem by W.B. Yeats. It is called The Second Coming. And in this poem, Yeats is basically writing about the end of the world, the apocalypse, as it were. Achebe kind of was attracted to that, in a sense, and he drew from that poem. So let me give you the very first few lines of that poem, and you'll maybe see where we can go on this. So this is how it goes. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction. while the worst are full of passionate intensity. As an aside, by the way, those last two lines always work. Those are evergreen lines. You can put them on a t-shirt, go to pretty much any political era you want to, and they work. But that's not the point. The point is that Achebe chose this poem because this poem is about the disintegration of things. It is about things that are no longer holding together the way they should. I think choosing Yeats was a good idea because Yeats died about 20 years before this book was written, and he was a very well-regarded poet in the Western world, in Europe especially. And so by kind of taking this line from somebody who would be, a line that honestly would be instantly recognizable to literate, well-read people like us, Achebe was kind of waving a little flag to the people of, to the Anglophones, saying, hey, this is for you. You want to read this. And the other part, of course, is that this first stanza of the poem really describes a lot of what he does in the book. The idea of once the center, whatever that center might be, it might be the culture, the language, the religion, the traditions, whatever that center is, once the center cannot hold, everything begins to fly off, right? It's like like centrifugal force. Things just fly away. And things will, of course, calm down. They'll establish a new order. But nevertheless, if you were invested in that old order, if you were invested in that old center, then this is an apocalypse to you. This is the destruction of everything you know and love. And so for Yeats, this was, very World War I-ish. But for Achebe, looking back on his people, this is colonization. So what we have is a book about this guy, centered on this guy named Okonkwo, who lives in the village of Umuofia in Western Africa. And Okonkwo is a very well-regarded man in Umuofia. He is a wrestler. He is a warrior. He holds many important titles. He hobnobs with all the important people in Umuofia. Everybody knows who he is. Everybody respects him. He is a man who values masculinity, manhood, and the only real emotion that he is comfortable with is rage and anger. He is very good at weaponizing his anger, and that's really the only emotion he can cope with. And we'll get into that at some point. Umuofia, of course, is this lovely little village or set of villages. I'm never quite clear on this, actually, whether Umuofia is kind of the region or the village. It gets a little confusing. But nevertheless, Umuofia is a very nice sort of bucolic place where they grow yams and they harvest palm wine. They make palm wine out of palm sap. And it is really quite lovely. It is a very nice place to be. It has everything that a small town would have. It has, little conflicts between neighbors. It's got weddings and funerals and big religious ceremonies. And it's got law and order and all of these things. And the first sort of maybe half or 2/3 of the book is about that. It is showing us, the reader, what life in pre-colonial Umuofia would have been like. We see them with their egwugwu, who are sort of the ancient ancestral spirits who come and they hold court and they decide disputes between the people of the village. We see a wedding and we see how the wedding ceremony is handled and what people bring. We see little small ceremonies, like when you go to visit somebody and how you honor them when you come into their home. You see how Okonkwo, as a wealthy man, what does it mean to be wealthy in this place? Well, he's got several wives, he has several children, he has a big compound, and again, but more importantly, he is paid great respect. People respect his opinion and his thoughts, even when he is wrong. But yeah, so a lot of this is the story of Umuofia centered around Okonkwo. Okonkwo, of course, has some kids. He has a son named Nwoye, and his son is a disappointment to him, to be perfectly frank. Because Okonkwo values masculinity and manhood and war and fighting, and Nwoye is very much not that. Nwoye is a lovely, innocent boy who really isn't interested in the bloodshed that his father's interested in. And one of the things is that Nwoye really resembles Okonkwo's father, Unoka, who was an itinerant musician and gambler and debtor. And one of the reasons why Okonkwo is the way he is because he has made a vow to never be like his father, who died in poverty. So he looks at his son Nwoye and he kind of sees his father, which is not good for Nwoye. We've got Ezinma, who is his daughter, who he adores Ezinma. If he loves anybody in this book, I don't know if Okonkwo really loves anybody in this book, but if he loves anybody, it is almost certainly Ezinma. And several times in the book, he says he wishes that she had been born a boy because she had a lot of the qualities, the insight, the cleverness that Okonkwo would want a son to have. We meet Ikemefuna, who is a hostage from another village. When another village kills a couple of people from Umuofia, a bargain is made. They send over a boy and a girl, and they are dealt with in Umuofia. And we'll get to Ikemefuna at some point. But Ikemefuna is great. Even though he's sort of a hostage son, he is sort of that macho, manly kid who Okonkwo really hopes will rub off on Nwoye. We'll see how that goes. So yeah, the whole thing, the whole first part of it is a lot of that. We see the life of Umuofia. And Achebe gives us a lot of time to do that. He gives us a lot of time to really, really appreciate what life in this village is like. Because at a certain point, of course, that's going to change. Okonkwo accidentally kills somebody. He is exiled for a while to his mother's village. And while that is happening, we get missionaries from Europe, from England, I believe, who come into the village, and they do what missionaries do. They spread the good word. They come in, they say, hey, we're just missionaries. We would like to tell you about our God. Is there a place we can set up our church? And they come in, and this is the pattern. This is how it works. The missionaries come in, they start to talk to people. They look to people who are sort of at the bottom rungs of society, the people who are maybe generally left out. They take in people who are suffering. They do, ostensibly good works, and they begin to convert. And they begin to convert more people. And as they do, they suddenly realize, realize that this conversion from traditional religions to Christianity is going to cause some problems. It's going to cause some conflict. So they write back home and they say, hey, we're doing our job here. We're doing real well, but we're worried that if this keeps up, we're going to have some problems. Would you mind sending us some governance and perhaps some protection? And so that's when the governor comes in. That's when the soldiers come in. That's when suddenly the people of Umuofia aren't really governing themselves anymore. Suddenly the people who are governing them and making the rules for them and eking out punishments for them are these foreigners, these people who have come in, but who've come in with power. They've come in with guns and weaponry and money, and they've hired people from other villages to come and work for them. And suddenly the people of Umuofia look around and they don't really know their village anymore. And Okonkwo comes back from his 7 years of exile, and he doesn't know the village anymore. He sees strangers in charge of things. He sees things that are different. And one of the things that Okonkwo cannot do is change. He cannot accept change. And so that leads him to kind of have to make that decision. Is he going to accept that his world has changed, or is he going to sort of leave the game, as it were? Is he going to do something drastic? And of course, because he's Okonkwo, he does something drastic. And we'll get to that eventually. But that's kind of the nutshell of the book. And like I said, the first part of it with these stories of old Umuofia is lovely. It's slow. It's relaxed. It's very interesting. It's like these little short stories kind of all cobbled together. And then once the colonization hits, it speeds up real fast. Because I imagine that's what it was like for these colonized people. They had thousands of years of traditional life that worked really, really well for them. And then suddenly within maybe a generation or less, everything's different. And I can't imagine really how terrifying that must be to people who are so deeply invested in their traditions. So what do I want to talk about in this series? I want to do a few things. I definitely want to talk about Okonkwo because he is at the heart of this book. What kind of person is he? We'll do a little character analysis because it's fun. We'll talk about him and some of the people most directly related to him and how they reflect who he is. I want to talk, of course, about the idea of tradition versus change, because that is also a very important theme to this book. How well do you value tradition? How much do you hold on to of your tradition? How useful is it to you? And then, of course, what do you do when change comes? Do you accept it? Do you resist it? Do you try to make use of it? I want to talk about gender roles, because the roles of women in this book are really interesting. It is a very patriarchal society. I'm not going to lie to you. But I kind of want to talk about what the roles of women are in this book and how they sort of operate within this patriarchal village. And of course, got to talk about colonialism. How can I not talk about colonialism? Because that's the whole point Achebe is trying to make, is that colonialism irreparably destroyed the traditions of the Igbo people. It turned them into something different, something new, and ostensibly something worse. That the people of the Igbo people, the people of the land that would one day be Nigeria, had to spend a long time trying to shake off. And they're still, to some degree, I'm sure, trying to shake off the remnants of their colonial past. So that's a lot to talk about. It's a lot to talk about. And I'm looking forward to it because, like I said, I enjoyed the book a lot. And I like talking about the book, as you may have guessed. So if you have read the book and you would like to join this conversation, I would love to hear from you. Get in the comments, as Mr. Mulligan would say. If you have not read the book, I hope you enjoy this. I hope that it helps you prepare for reading it yourself and that you get more insight from the book when you read it. So that'll do it for now, I think. Stick with me. Make sure that you do the whole subscribing thing so that you get your notifications when I put up a new one. I try to put them up on a regular schedule. You'll get used to it, don't worry. And until then, until the next video, I will see you later.